Hello, Internet. I didn't see you there. Yes, this is the third year in a row that I'm doing that joke, and I'm not going to stop doing it. So welcome to Blondihacks. This is my third year anniversary special, and as is tradition, every year I like to do a little Q&A. I get my patrons to ask some questions, and I answer them here on the show. And, if one person has a question, a bunch of others probably do too, so hopefully this will cover all of your questions. So let's go. First question is, what are your 10 commandments in the hobby machine shop? I'll answer that as we go along. If you had an unlimited budget, what machine tool would you buy that's different from what you currently have? Well, that's an easy one. The elephant that is not in this room is a surface grinder. A surface grinder really unlocks a lot of power in a machine shop for making tools and doing really precision work in a way that you really can't do any other way. So if I had infinite space and money, a surface grinder would be sitting right here or over there or, wherever there was space. What does Sprocket get for special treats, and has she ever destroyed any furniture or projects? Well, Sprocket gets only veterinarian-approved dental treats, seeing as how I have 2 veterinarians in my immediate family. I was not getting away with anything less. And luckily, she's not a very destructive cat. She's really never damaged much around the house, except the carpet in the living room. She's very determined to ruin that. Not to be a sycophant, but there are times when I would do an operation differently, but by and large, it's only a matter of kit or perspective. Now, there's no actual question in that, but I wanted to talk about it anyway because it's actually, I think, interesting. A lot of what you see me do on this channel is, I'm sure, different than a lot of what you would do. And I think oftentimes it is because I have probably smaller machines than you do, or maybe larger than some of you. And, you have to make a decision on how to do something based on the equipment you have and the time you have and the type of material you're using and your skill set. A lot of times I do something less than perfectly because I don't know a better way. This is all a learning process for me as much as it is for any of us in this hobby. So I think it's okay to have different opinions from how I would do something. Just don't be a jerk about it when you share those opinions with other people. How much time do you spend on video production versus actual shop time for a video? I would say the ratio is about 3-to-1 video production to actual shop time. That includes time spent on the video setup while working on the project. Every operation I do, you got to set up the camera and make sure the lighting and the focus are right and all those sorts of things. And if it's a new operation that I haven't done before, I might do a test shot to make sure it's going to come out nice. Certain corners of my shop, the lighting isn't good, so if I do a shot over there, I have to go and set up extra lights. So it depends on the project a lot. Some projects that ratio is flipped, like on the boiler project. It's probably 3 times as much time spent on the boiler as I have actually filming it, because I'm not going to refilm all the stuff I've already shown you and make you watch the same setups over and over, that sort of thing. What's your software gear and process for video production? Well, most people don't know this, but the first 2.5 years of this channel were shot entirely on a Galaxy Note 8 cell phone. I have since upgraded to a Nikon full-frame DSLR, which is nice for shooting the machine tools because you don't get rolling shutter artifacts there. And I've got a couple of different lenses that I use, mostly for up-close work, but I've also got a nice long lens when I want some depth of field effects, and also for some operations like silver soldering where I need to keep the camera away from the heat. I've had this camera go into thermal shutdown a couple of times already. But much like machine tools, it's much more about the operator than the gear, and you really don't need a lot of fancy stuff to make YouTube channel videos. I learned photography from my mom, and she taught me all of the basics, which apply to any kind of camera that you're using. For software, again, I started out with the free stuff. I used HitFilm Express, which is actually very good free software. I've since upgraded to Final Cut Pro, which has made me a lot more efficient, but the free software out there is pretty good. So if you're interested in doing this kind of thing, take a look at it. Really, most of the budget on this channel has been spent on audio. Audio is much harder than video, getting good quality audio in every situation, so I've spent way more on microphones than I ever did on camera gear. If you were to buy a new lathe today, what features would you look for that are different from what this one has? That's an easy question. I really like this lathe a lot, but there are 2 things that it really needs. The first is threading gears in the quick change gearbox. That's pretty difficult to find in small lathes like this. There are some older lathes that did have it. Some of the old South Bend lathes had a quick change gearbox option. It's a little hard to find the ones that have it. And I believe the Myford lathes that you can get over in England have a quick change gearbox option with threading gears. That's a big win if you can get that. The other big thing that this lathe needs that is really missing from a lot of these Chinese lathes is a back gear. You know, it has a 10-inch swing, this lathe, but above about 5-6 inches, you've got so little power left that you can't cut anything that big anyway. And a back gear is really what solves that problem. So that's something that, again, the older South Bends and stuff had that for some reason they've stopped doing in these newer lathes, I guess to cut costs. So that's definitely something I would want. What is something that you wish was more available to hobby machinists? For me, I think that's information. There's tons of great YouTube machining channels, not a lot of them focused on the hobbyist with small equipment, and not a lot of them focused on education, and also not a lot of great books out there for the modern hobby machinist. There's lots of great books from the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, which I've shown many of those on my channel. The problem with them is that they're all reprints from the 80s, and the photography in them is really bad because it's been reprinted 16 times and so on. So the quality of books that you can get is pretty spotty and uneven. And so I'd really like to see more information. The whole reason I started this channel was because I was looking for a resource like this when I started, and I really couldn't find something that was really targeted at the kind of information that I think a beginning hobbyist really needs. So, information. Has your intro gotten slightly faster over the years? In fact, there's a distinct moment where it doubled in speed because I went into Final Cut Pro and hit 2x on it. At some point I decided it was just too slow, and you know, kids today, everything's got to be snappy, so I sped it up. What got you interested in metalwork and machining? That might be Adam Booth's fault. I think he was probably the first channel that I really got into. But I've always liked making things, and I had a brief foray into woodworking like many of us, and I didn't really like it. I didn't like the tools. They're loud and they're messy, and I just didn't have a feel for wood. It just didn't click for me. But metalworking just really appealed to me. For me, machining is kind of like the closest you can get to perfection when making things. Like, you can very nearly make things perfect, and in a way that you can't, I think, with other mediums. And that really appeals to me as a computer and graphics nerd where everything's always perfect. So there's something about that. To me, it's, as a civilization, kind of the highest form of making things. Everything that we have around us is because we've achieved precision in just about everything that we do now. And there's something very addictive about precision, I guess. Why is cheese, and what does it mean? I do not wear the cheese wears me. Have you ever considered making an internal combustion engine from scratch? Not full size, although I've certainly rebuilt my share of engines, but I will make a model internal combustion engine at some point on the channel. Internal combustion engines are much, much fussier than steam engines. Everything on them really has to be perfect for them to run. And so I think making a model gas engine is a little outside of my skill level right now, but it's definitely something that I would like to work towards. The path of the hobby machinist very much follows the path of the industrialization of civilization. You start out making the easier stuff like steam engines, which are very forgiving. You can build them pretty poorly and they still run. And then you move on to the primitive forms of gas engines like hit and miss engines. Again, they're pretty forgiving. And then you move on to full-blown four-stroke internal combustion engines where if everything isn't absolutely perfect, they self-destruct. So those are much more challenging for a hobbyist to build. And the smaller the scale is, the more perfect everything has to be. If the weight balance isn't just right and all the tolerances and all the clearances aren't just perfect, it doesn't run, because at the smaller scale, everything's much more sensitive to things being perfect because you don't have as much inertia and you don't have, as much wiggle room on the forces involved. So it's a very challenging type of project. So have a lot of respect for those YouTube machinists that you may have seen who've built working V10 internal combustion engines. Those are really, really something special. What's your history of activities with motor vehicles? I guess that's my mom's fault. She was really into cars and she got me into them from a young age, and then my dad taught me how to work on cars, and much of my childhood was spent on the family farm where, of course, we were all working on machinery, and as soon as your legs are long enough to reach a clutch in my family, you are put on a machine and put to work. So machinery is just in our family, it's in our blood, and I started racing cars about 15 years ago. I gave it up a couple of years ago because racing cars and especially working on cars is very much a young person's game, and my back just can't take it anymore. The reaching up and the bending down and the crawling around on the ground that you need to do to work on cars is not for those of us of a certain age. So that's, but it's always going to be in my blood. I've always got a broken down something in my driveway. There's a really nice classic 5 Series BMW to my left here that is just gorgeous to look at and currently doesn't run. So I am what I am. What can I say? How long does it take you to go from sitting on the couch to in the shop making chips? I want to answer this question in a slightly different way because I think the core of it is, how do you keep your excitement and your passion for something going so that those times when you don't feel like coming out here and doing stuff, that you can still do it? To me, what it's about is finding the right projects, because there's going to be tough times on any project, and it's the passion for that project that keeps you going. If you've read my blog, you may have seen my project Veronica, which was a computer built from scratch, which was something I always wanted to do, kind of on the scale of building a steam engine from scratch. And that was a 5-year project because, frankly, when I started, I was in way over my head on electrical engineering. And there were times where I had to walk away from that project for months at a time because I had to spend time learning and figuring out all the things that I didn't know to solve a problem. And getting through those downtimes, it was the passion that did that. I was so excited by this idea of doing what Steve Wozniak did, building a computer from scratch, that if I hadn't had that passion for the final goal, I wouldn't have made it through the whole project. And for me, building a steam engine from scratch was similar. And in my head, I have a bunch of other long-term projects like that are going to be on this channel someday. And those are very much similar in that my excitement for them is so great that it's going to carry me through all the dark times. Like when you try to silver solder a boiler and it completely fails and you have to cut it apart and start again. It's my excitement for steam power and really wanting to do this that keeps me going through that kind of stuff. Do you have any electronics projects lined up? I do, in fact. I have a whole list of things I want to do with Veronica, the homebrew computer that I mentioned. Time is tight, though, with the day job and the YouTube channel and everything else, and so that stuff tends to get deprioritized. I will get back to it, though, when I have more time. I do tend to do that stuff on the blog rather than here on the channel because I haven't figured out a good way to film electronics projects that's interesting. There's lots of great YouTube electronics channels, so they exist, and kudos to those people who do it. For me, I think that works better in print, so I tend to do photographs and stretch my writing legs there instead. And I have a list of things that Johnny Mnemonic needs as well. He's been down for quite a while, so keep an eye on my blog for that stuff. What is your personal vision and objective for the channel? I think for right now, it's to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm really enjoying making approachable content. I really want to bring more people into hobby machining. I think machine shop work has a pretty high barrier to entry, and I think it's intimidating for a lot of people. But I think a lot more people would enjoy it than who are currently doing it. And I want to do anything I can to lower the barrier to entry and just bring more people into this because it's really fun. What was the outcome of the Machinist Relay project? I've answered this question a lot, and I'm going to answer it again because people keep asking it, and I understand why. It disappeared is the answer. It had gone to AVE, he did some stuff, and then it went to John Saunders, and they didn't do anything with it, but they sent it to someone else, and I don't know who that someone else is, and I never heard from it again. So the bottom line is, it wasn't as interesting a project to the YouTube machining community as it was to me. I thought it was a neat idea, but not every idea that we think is neat to everybody. So yeah, maybe I'll try again someday, but for now, it's dead. I'm sorry, let it go. And hey, if you know where it is, let me know. Have you looked into or heard of Touch DRO at all? I have not. I've seen a lot of channels setting those up and using them, and they look pretty cool, but I've never tried one, so can't say anything. What do you do for a first aid? It's never a bad thing to have a little bit of first aid training, which I do for my day job especially, and I think everyone should know CPR. It's a good thing to take a class on that. But just like any other kind of somewhat dangerous hobby, I guess, it's never a bad idea to have someone know where you are. Keep your phone within arm's length. That's an easy thing we can do nowadays, that you can always call for help if something really bad happens. But, here in the hobby machine shop, we're mostly talking about metal splinters and, the occasional oopsie. The best first aid, of course, is prevention. Practice safe work habits and just really prevent the bad things from happening. The big one for me is, in addition to the usual safety stuff that I talk about all the time, safety glasses, etc., the big one is don't be out here when you're tired. It's very easy to get deep on a project and you're almost done finishing something and you're starting to get a little fuzzy in the head. That's the time you got to recognize, put the tools down, and call it a day, because that's the time you're going to get hurt. And I talked about growing up on the family farm. You're always around big machinery that can mangle and murder you on a moment's notice without even slowing down. And my dad taught me how to be what the mindset is around machinery. It's very much, you have to treat it like a trained tiger, in that you control it and it will do what you want and it will make your life very interesting, but never forget that it's a tiger. The moment you turn your back on it, it's going to eat you. How many teeth on a sprocket? 6, 7, carry the 4, 362. Have you ever just thrown in the towel on a project? When I was younger, I did that a lot. I gave up on projects all the time. As I've gotten older, I've learned two things. One, how to get more comfortable with failure so that I won't give up before things are finished. And two, how to choose projects that I'm excited enough about to get through the failures. And that's really the two keys to not throwing in the towels on things. Choosing the right projects and building your tolerance for failure. If you had to start over from scratch, what order would you replace your machines and tooling in? I think I would basically start the same way I did, which is with the lathe and some high-speed steel and a couple of measuring tools and other things. Basically the stuff that I show in my Beginners to Machining video series. That's really what I would do. It's pretty close to what I did. I bought a few things that I thought I would need and didn't need, but mostly I think that was a pretty good way to go. As the channel has grown, has it changed the way you think about and talk about your mistakes? That's a great question. My channel is known for showing mistakes and, frankly, embracing and reveling in mistakes, because we all make mistakes. And I think if we could all get a little more comfortable with mistakes, I think the world would be a better place. There's a management concept called the power of vulnerability. If you can make yourself comfortable with being vulnerable in front of other people, it makes them comfortable being vulnerable with you. And we can all share in our mistakes and learn from each other without it becoming a game of saving face and trying to seem perfect with other people all the time. I think that's really important, especially in this world of social media where we're seeing these constructed perfect versions of each other's lives. We all eat this amazing food and we have these amazing vacations and whatever. It's the social version of photoshopped pictures of fashion models. It's this version of reality that isn't real and that none of us have, and it tends to just make us all feel crappy about our own lives. So the more we can embrace each other's vulnerability and humanity, I think the better off we're all going to be. But back to the original question, I am committed to showing and sharing my mistakes with all of you. Obviously, as the audience gets bigger, I get more negativity and more new people coming in who don't understand, what I'm trying to do here, that I'm sharing my learning with you and that I don't know everything and I'm not claiming to know everything, and that's okay, that we can still share this content and have fun with each other without all of us knowing everything and learn from each other. So, it comes with the channel growing, I guess, but I'm going to keep it going as long as I can. Do you design everything you make in CAD, or is that just for the channel? I actually do design most of my stuff in CAD, and for me, it's actually for me. I really struggle to visualize more complex parts in my head and keep things all in my head without making mistakes. So for me personally, modeling things in CAD really helps me prevent mistakes. And of course, in the machine shop, preventing mistakes saves you a lot of time. So for me, it's very worthwhile to just model it in CAD so I can actually see how the parts relate to each other, especially if there's angles or different features that interlock. It can be really difficult for me, at least, to visualize how those things all go together. And doing it in CAD, I very frequently see, that bolt hole goes through that shaft over there, so that's not going to work, things like that. So I do model everything in CAD, and I really like having the drawings from that in front of me in the shop here, so that when I'm making the parts, I don't have to be thinking too much about the whole mechanism and inventing as I go along. I'm just focused on making that part in front of me and getting the dimensions right and getting the order of operations right for that part. And then at the end, it all comes together and it works because I modeled it in CAD for the most part. I still make mistakes even though I'm doing stuff in CAD, but for me, it really helps. Well, that's my little Q&A. If you made it this far, I think that means it was interesting enough. But thank you all for watching. You know, the growth of the channel has been amazing, and that's because of all of you who are watching, liking, subscribing, sharing the videos on social media. That's really why all of this has happened, and I couldn't do it without you. And an extra thanks to my patrons. Not everybody can afford to support on Patreon, and that's totally okay. But those of you who can and do, I really extra appreciate that, because that's really what keeps all of this going. And thank you all for watching, and here's to another 3 years. I'm not a great video producer, but I try to do as much as I can and try to... I'm rambling.